Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. This talk is called Microinteractions, and I'm going to start with a little story. So this, for those of you who don't know it, is Avery Fisher Hall. And Avery Fisher Hall is one of the premier concert venues in New York City. So it's one of those places where people have waited for years to get their orchestra seats, and they pay thousands of dollars to get these premier seats. And it's a great place to go hear music. And about 2 years ago, cold winter night, it's middle of January, it's a Wednesday, and Mahler's, the orchestra is performing Mahler's Symphony No. 9, and that's what you're hearing right now. For those of you who don't know Mahler's Symphony 9, and you can hear a snippet, it's very quiet, it's very lethargic, and it ends with this very grave adagio piece, which ends about an hour or so's worth of music. So the audience is listening to this, and it's very quiet. It's nearing the final measures of the piece, and then this happens. And it keeps going, and going, and going, and the conductor stops the orchestra. And people start. I'll silence it now, but it went on for a long time. People started shouting and throwing things. It was pure pandemonium. And so the Avery Fisher Hall started calling it the case of Patron X, and they called the gentleman whose phone went off Patron X to prevent retribution from happening to him. Because so many people were so angry about what happened. So Patron X was a longtime symphony goer, and he was in the front row, and he was just as angry as everybody else. He didn't realize that his phone was going off because he had just gotten his iPhone the day before. His company had made him switch to a BlackBerry, from a BlackBerry to an iPhone. And so he had turned the ringer off and assumed that all of his alarms would also be turned off. But clearly that wasn't the case. That didn't happen. So, what was interesting is that this made news, and people started making jokes about it. So, composer Daniel Dorff said, "I'm changing my ringtone to be Mahler 9 just in case." But then what was fascinating was that people actually started debating about the rule of when you turn your ringer off. Should it mute everything? Does it actually turn everything off or not? And some people were like, yeah, of course, it should definitely turn everything off. It's my fault if I've set an alarm. And other people were like, no, don't. If you do that, there's going to be millions of people that would oversleep. I would have overslept this morning myself had that been the rule. So I think it's an interesting. It was just an interesting case study in that microinteractions seldom make the news, and silencing your phone is a great example of a microinteraction. And what I mean by microinteractions are things that are a single use case. And that do one thing and one thing well. They can be little pieces of functionality that exist on their own, or that they exist around other pieces of larger features. And yeah, microinteractions do this one task well. That's what they're all about. And my thesis is basically this: that the difference between a product that you love and one that you simply just tolerate are the microinteractions that you have with it. If you care about user experience, you should care about microinteractions. So design, with apologies to my colleague John, design's not just about wicked problems. It certainly can address wicked problems, and over the last 10 years, we've definitely been told to really solve these giant systematic problems, to look at the bigger picture, and that's great, and I really appreciate that. But there is definitely another way to work, another way to think about design, and that is by working from the bottom up to really focus on these details that delight. Because the things that sometimes get lost when we do work in these very large systems are those small moments, those humane moments that really can bring an overall system or a big system to life. So I think this is really another way to change the world, by really making these moments of delight that the things that people really enjoy, and we as designers can actually enjoy designing, are these small moments of delight. The really satisfying click, a beautiful curve, a really understandable mental model. All these things are things that can bring joy to people and really change the world from the bottom. So here's a list of micro-interactions that are kind of contain product moments. And if you look at this list, which includes everything from changing settings to logging in and making a calendar event and stuff like that, these are often the things that we ignore or we save to the very end because oh God, if I have to do another login, these are the things that we often overlook. But if we start to look at things like, this is just my menu bar from a random day, each one of these things is actually a trigger for micro-interactions. Micro-interactions are all around us. They're everywhere. They're in our walls, they're in our apps, they're in our operating systems. Our operating systems are mostly just a bundled collection of micro-interactions. Oh, someone's demonstrating for real how it works. I need to now plant someone in the audience every time to do that. That'd be great. Micro-interactions can also be big. So some apps are simply a micro-interaction. So for example, ConvertBot here is a micro-interaction that, all it does is one thing. It converts one value to another, but it does it in this really pleasing way. A lot of our appliances are also equally micro-interaction driven. So this toaster, this Breville toaster, does one thing really well. It makes toast. So you put the toast in, and when it pops up, if you need a little bit more, there's a button that says a little bit more, and you push that, and it does it really well. It's thought about the whole use case. So what are micro-interactions good for? They're good for this kind of list of things, everything from changing the volume to, as we said, turning off the ringer, adjusting any kinds of settings, all these kind of little things that are really easy and kind of fast to do and are often very overlooked. So let's take a couple examples. So this is Facebook, obviously, and if someone posts on your Facebook wall a status message that's not in your default language, it offers, hey, do you want to see a translation of this? Of course, one of the most famous now micro-interactions is the like button. The like button is so important. It's become a signature moment for Facebook, and we'll talk about that in a second. This is high-rise, and so while it's downloading, it just gives you a little tic-tac-toe while you're waiting for the download. It's kind of silly, but it does something a little amusing for what otherwise could be a really tedious kind of task. This is one of my favorites from iOS, where if you turn on the dictation to start talking, it actually lowers the fans inside the laptop in order so that there's no extra noise when you're doing dictation. It's just really well thought out. So what's the difference between a micro-interaction and a feature? So features are things that I think have multiple use cases. They're much more cognitively challenging. They're longer in duration. They take, they can just be these very complex things. Whereas micro-interactions are things that are short, they're fast, they're shallow, and they're often very frequently overlooked, both by us in the design process and by users. But I think that if you care about the user experience, you have to care about microinteractions. I think that if you can have the greatest features in the world, but if the microinteractions around it are bad, then the users are going to be surrounded by pain and frustration. If I can't log in because it's so annoying, or I can't manage my account, I'm not going to care about the really nice feature that you have hidden somewhere. So I think this was the problem with the original Android version, the G1 Android. I mean, it worked. It did really well. I mean, it could make calls. It could make texts. But the microinteractions inside of it, like search and the back button, these things were really applied very inconsistently. And so people didn't warm up to it until those things started to resolve themselves in future versions. So I think experience design is working at multiple levels. It's working at both the big picture vision level and diving down into kind of this detail level where we're dealing with and thinking about the micro-interactions that people have with their product. And I think if done well, the micro-interactions, like the like button, can be signature moments. Kelly played this, and I was surprised to hear it.
You've got mail.
You've got mail. That was such a signature moment that they made a movie out of it. I mean, so these things can really start to increase loyalty and adoption of your product. We designed this little tool for surgeons at Smart Design, and it actually became this very interesting signature moment that we weren't quite expecting, although pleased to have it happen.
While surgeons use the audio feedback from the machine to actually improve how they use the tools.
It's very intuitive. The tone tells you when to stop, when to start, when you're actually in a sweet zone. So it kind of guides you through the surgical procedure. And then you hear the last tone, it tells me I'm done.
It saves them time because they know exactly when to start cutting. Sometimes they even sing along with the final chime at the end.
So if you can get surgeons to sing along with your product, you're doing something right. So the last thing I want to say about microinteractions is they just work really well in the world that we live in with screens on everything that we have. They can just translate from screen to screen in a really nice way that really can tie a whole ecosystem of products together. So now that I've hopefully gotten you to agree, okay, these little things are worth thinking about. How do we go do them? And this is a model that I put together. It also works for features, but I think for microinteractions, it works particularly well because of the speed of them. And I think each one of these things, the trigger that starts the microinteraction, the rules that happen after the trigger has been initiated, the feedback that you get, and then the loops and modes which make up the meta parts of the microinteraction. Each one of these things is a dial that you can turn to adjust your microinteraction, to make sure that something is interesting or something works more efficiently or something is more engaging by looking at each part of the microinteraction model. So quickly, triggers, there's two kinds of triggers. So there's manual triggers and system triggers. So manual triggers are the ones that we're the most used to. So they are the buttons, the knobs, the dials, the taps, the swipes, the waves, all the things that a user is deliberately doing because they're trying to get something done. And the question to ask here is, what's the proper control for this context for the user's need? What do they need to be able to do, and what's the control that I give that to, and what control do I give that to them? So this, for instance, is the lock screen of the iPhone, where if you touch the little the camera, the whole screen jumps up a little bit and says, hey, there's a camera under here. You can now get to it. Of course, slide to unlock, another great micro interaction, really kind of a signature piece for the iOS. Manual triggers can even be forms, things like this form from Discus. So as you fill in your email address at the beginning, it starts to guess your name just based off your email address. Just a little thing, but very kind of clever. Someone actually took the time to think through this little form. And triggers don't necessarily have to be even visible. So this is a neat one from Askimet, where Askimet, if you right-click on their logo, it says, "Oh, are you looking for the logo? It's here under this little window. Here's where it is." It's completely invisible to 99% of the people that go on their site, but it's a really nice little thing for anyone who happens to be looking for the logo. Of course, one of the newest things about invisible triggers is the Google Glass and the Google Glass gesture of nodding your head and the little screen comes up, which I think will be interesting as we all walk around nodding at each other. The thing that I think is more interesting is all about system triggers. So system triggers are what happens when a set of conditions are met and a microinteraction triggers on its own. So the question to ask here is all about what can the system intuit from users' needs in order to supply those without the user really needing to do much of anything. So the obligatory nest slide. So you walk near the nest and the nest lights up and shows you the temperature. You don't have to touch it. You don't have to turn it on. Just as you move near it, it shows you the temperature. This is a great one from Deliveries, which is a great little app. So if you go to Deliveries with something on your clipboard that looks like a delivery code, it recognizes that and says, hey, do you want to put this into the app? You don't have to go and find it and manually add it. It's smart enough to recognize and even recognize who the carrier is. It's a really nicely done. You don't have to do anything for it. This is another nice one from Instapaper. So as you're reading with your phone, or you've got your phone out and you're like, oh, and you tilt it, but then you jerk it back, it brings up the rotation lock. Hey, do you need the rotation lock on? You don't have to go dig into a setting somewhere to find the rotation lock. It notices that, hey, you may want this. So a couple principles that around microinteractions I like to talk about. So the first is like bring the data forward. How do you bring the data forward? What is it inside the app? What is it inside the microinteraction that you can bring forward so that users don't have to go all the way into the microinteraction to get that information? So things like this drive me crazy because it doesn't bring the data forward, right? It's always 73 and sunny in the Apple weather app, but it really isn't. I would like to just have this thing tell me what the weather is before I have to go all the way in. And I think that that's what Windows Live Tiles does very well. So you've got the happy face if everything's running well, and you've got the kind of frowny face over here if there's something that needs your attention and you have to go into the actual app itself. Google Chrome tells you what's being downloaded, how many things are being downloaded, and the progress of that. You don't have to go in and look at that. Really nice little bringing the data forward there. Second part of microinteractions are all about the rules. The rules are basically what happens. What happens after I push the button? What happens when I trigger the microinteraction? So the rules determine what can and cannot be done. So rules are kind of invisible, so the only way that we really understand the rules is through feedback. But the rules basically are like the rules of the game. What can I do when I'm playing this? How do I make this thing go and do what I need it to do? How do I accomplish my goal? So this is just a list of some of the things that rules determine, everything from when feedback's being delivered, what data is being used, all the constraints that may be in the system. And this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just how the rules start to manifest. So let's do a quick example. So the rules of a lamp, one of the simplest micro interactions that there is. So the rules of a lamp are: I turn the switch, the lamp comes on, it stays on until I flick the switch again, and then the lamp goes out. But once I start to add things like a motion sensor to it, okay, wow, the rules start to get a lot more complicated. So now I need to check to see if every couple seconds if there's some movement. Oh, is there movement? Oh, is it a cat or is it a human being? Oh, no, it's a human being. So turn the light on, and then, oh, after that, keep checking to see if there's any movement, and then turn the lights off if there's not. So, and I think we've all been caught on the receiving end of this rule in a bathroom stall somewhere where we've sat down, the lights go out, and we're frantically waving, looking for the sensor on the ceiling somewhere. Spotify has a really nice rule, example of a rule when you go from listening on one device to listening to another. It pauses on the one device and picks up right where you left off on the other device. Very simple, but it makes the service seem very seamless between multiple devices. Rules can also prevent people from using your site in ways that you don't want them to. So this is Google's What Do You Love? So if you put anything that's inappropriate, shall we say, into the What You Love, it only returns the words kittens. So it changes your search term to kittens. Rules can basically, one great principle for the rules is using them to prevent human error. How can you prevent errors from happening using the rules? So you can make a rule like this one for this famous one from Gmail, where if you've written, no, I've attached this file, but then didn't attach anything, it sends this message up. It says, hey, did you mean to attach something? Which is awesome, also kind of creepy, but awesome, because it does prevent human error. It prevents you from making a mistake that you otherwise might have made. This is from Make a Cocktail. So if you don't put anything in the search terms, it just gives you a cocktail. It just assumes you're drunk already and just fixes that error for you. It can also help instead of doing things like, So this is from Meetup. And if it doesn't find anything within your search parameters, it actually expands the search parameters for you, looking for something else, just so it doesn't give you a 404 page like can't find anything. Sorry. The other great principle around rules is don't start from zero. There's almost always something that you know about the user, about the context of use, or the platform that they're on, that will allow you to make the microinteraction better. That you can then turn to say like, hey, I'm going to make some guesses based off of these things. So one of my favorite apps is the navigation app Waze. So when I get into my car at night and I turn the Waze app on, it pops this up and says, hey, are you driving home? Is this where you're going? Because it knows that every day at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock I get in my car, and that's what I usually do. So after a couple times, it just starts to suggest that to you. Hey, here's where you go. You can cancel it, of course, and switch or go somewhere else. But it suggests based on, I didn't tell it to do this, but just based off my behavior, it said, this is what you might want to do. It can also help guess forms and stuff like that. So the rules, so what do we ever have to select a credit card type, right? Because all credit cards have a unique number. And so if I start to type 4, it's a Visa card. It's not anything else. So Visa automatically gets selected if I type a 4. You'd never have to select a a credit card type. As I mentioned, the rules are invisible, so the only way that we really understand the rules are through feedback, through the feedback that we get from the system. So feedback, or the lack of feedback, allows us to know what we can do and what we can't do with a micro-interaction. So this is from Twitter. This is Twitter's password fill-out form, which is a pretty nice example of a micro-interaction, where it really spells out the rules for you. Hey, this is a not so great password. This is an okay password. This is a strong password. This is from Mailchimp. So Mailchimp, if you start to make the email newsletter too long, the chimp's arm stretches and he starts to be like, oh no. And then if you stretch it too long, his arm actually pops off, and it's, and he gets very sad. So. Feedback, of course, doesn't have to always be visual. This is some sound from GE's cafe setup, where line of appliances. So these are just some sounds that they have started to do to create these little ear cons for each of these actions. You get the idea. So a great principle for feedback is to use the overlooked. We have a lot of things on our screens and even in our physical interfaces already. So what are the things that we could use that are already there to convey feedback? What are the things that are, so that we don't have to add one more thing, but instead use what is often overlooked? So this is a process my order button. You press the button, and it turns into the progress bar. The only thing that would be better is if they actually changed the text, as it was, why doesn't it say processing my order, or, done, process your order again? They don't change the text. That would make it a little better, but it's still a nice, using what could otherwise, they would have otherwise had to put a whole other progress bar in here. This is a little spinner that tells you what is working in the background. And the nice thing about this is that the number of parts to the spinner are actually the number of processes that are happening in the background. And this is from Chrome, where when you search for a word in Chrome, it actually uses the scroll bar on the side to tell you where in the document that word appears. It's a really nice way of using what would otherwise be overlooked. Another thing about feedback is really to speak human. Feedback is for humans, after all, so it's good to speak human language. So what are the things that we respond to? Well, one of the things is faces, right? So this is threadless. It's got the sad shopping cart. You put stuff into the shopping cart gets happy. Really pretty basic. Boxy here, when the network connection is down, Boxy goes to sleep. Again, pretty simplistic, but it was very effective. This is what not to do. Put a happy smiley face on a message that's, hey, you've got no mail, you're kind of a loser. That's from Gmail. Why do that? A little humor goes a long way. This is Dropbox. So if it's taking a long time, it tells you, oh, go grab a Snickers and come back when it's ready. This is Google SMS. If the message that you're typing gets too long, it stops actually counting the number of characters and just says, really, really. So the last part of microinteractions is all about the loops and modes that make up the meta part of microinteractions. So for modes in general, you want to avoid them for microinteractions, but just under one case, which is that if there is a task that is done infrequently that would otherwise disrupt the flow of the microinteraction, give it a mode. So, like in this case for the weather app, I don't change the cities very often, but hey, when I do, it's a separate mode, and then it flips back to what is the usual kind of microinteraction app of just glancing at the weather. Loops are definitely more effective. So loops can actually do things like measure things over time. So if you're having trouble, for instance, on TED buffering a video, it actually says, hey, why don't you just download this instead of watching this streaming? It's taking too long. It can also prevent things from. It can also prevent abuse. So this is on Facebook, where if you start friending too many people over and over, it's like, whoa, hey, you've friended too many people right now. You need to slow down. And the last principle I want to talk about is using long loops. What happens when people come back to your app or your product? What happens when they trigger the microinteraction for the second time, or the third time, or the 1,000th time? How does it learn? How does it know? And what changes over time? So on Spotify, the text starts to fade once it's been in there for a long time. Ooh, number 200. Is 200 here? This is from Chrome, so when there's an update on Chrome, you get this green apple, but if you don't update it, it starts to turn into this yellowish, sickly looking. The apple starts to rot over here in the corner. On eBay, you can, if you've bought something, it actually tells you, hey, you can go buy another. It changes the text of the button to be buy another. And then this is the Ford Smart Gauge. So over time, if you drive very eco-friendly, the more leaves kind of grow slowly over time along the side of the steering column. So how do we start to introduce this into our process? Well, the first is to start looking for microinteractions wherever you find them. When you find them, you're like, oh, this could be interesting, and maybe I'll spruce this one up. Maybe I'll think about it, and then look at the 4 parts of the microinteraction and figure out which dial you'd like to turn. Is it the trigger? Is it the loop? Is it the rules? Is it feedback? What is it you can do to make this microinteraction better? The second thing is to really think of everything as a microinteraction, and this is a way that industrial designers have been working for years. People like Dieter Rams and the Ames, they really looked through the details and really focused on all the details so that everything was a microinteraction. Everything was a detail. And you can do this with their features too. You can break your features up until they're really just a series of microinteractions that are all strung together. And that's another way to work. And just a caveat, this is very hard. I mean, obviously, a lot of companies aren't set up to work this way, particularly any of us that work as consultants or in agencies. It's very hard to get that time to polish those details. But I think that the story I told at the beginning of Poor Patron X, I think let us know that just reminds us that these microinteractions do matter, that they can create these experiences both for ourselves and for all the people around us, for good and ill. And I think that for us, the microinteractions really show that, and for our users, that some attention, that some care has been paid to the product that they have. And really, isn't that all that we just want? So think small and go change the world. Thank you.